Amazing. We are live. Welcome, everybody, to our AMA today. We have Prama, who is a staff UX researcher at Hubspot, with us. We'll probably wait a minute or two before we get started, but in the meantime, feel free to share where you're dialing in from. Would love to see where folks are from. Where are you joining us from today, Prama?
I'm joining from London, United Kingdom. It's cold, it's dark, and it's raining today. I wish it was not.
What time is it there for you?
It's about 5, so it's not too late, 5 in the evening, but it feels like it's like 8 or 9.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I definitely know that feeling in the like dead of winter. It's 5 p.m. Well, thank you for being here with us after your workday is done.
It's really nice to be here. When I first moved to Europe, that was the biggest shock I had. I was used to sun setting at 6 p.m. I did not know that sun sets before that.
Oh yeah. Yep, it's tragic in the winter. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Good to see where folks are dialing in from. I also just launched a poll to see how everyone is feeling about 2026 to kind of get us warmed up today. It seems like we're energized and ready to go. I don't know, Prama, how are you feeling about the beginning of 2026?
I think I have the same sentiment. I'm very optimistic about this year. At least in Jan, it feels like a lot of things can happen. But I hope I can sustain that towards the end of the year as the
Yeah,
year progresses.
yeah, 100%. We got a few folks saying, I need another holiday. I can kind of relate to that. But yeah,
Yeah,
for
I
the
can.
most part. Sorry?
Sorry, I was saying I can also see things are piling up. Like Jan, I was like mid of Jan, everything is piling up. Yes, but I'm still very excited at the same time.
Totally, yeah. It's good. It's a good work stress, motivating. Awesome. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Super excited to have Prama here with us today. For those of you who maybe haven't listened to a Rally AMA before, my name is Sydney. I am our senior product marketing manager here at Rally. And yeah, I've been with the Rally team for just over 2 years now and been hosting these AMAs every month. So super excited to have Prama with us, who is a staff UXR at HubSpot. And she spent years working inside fast-moving growth teams like Meta, Zalando, Uber, and more, where, of course, research has to be quick, repeatable, operationally sound, or else nothing happens. So Prama, maybe I will pass it over to you to do a quick introduction on yourself and share a little bit about your role at HubSpot.
Absolutely. Like you said, I've worked at Uber, I've worked at Meta, I've been at Zalando in 26, and now I'm at HubSpot. I've worked in growth teams throughout my career. It was a coincidence. It was not a thing that I decided, but I realized that it so happened that I was always in growth teams. And the thing about growth teams is that everything is moving fast because you're also chasing competition. So it's not just internal pressure; it's also external pressure. And working in growth teams is quite similar, quite similar to working with business metrics as well. So customer impact and business impact go very close together, and you have to constantly show that as a research team to build trust. And in HubSpot, I work again on growth team. Now we call customer journey team, but essentially I'm focused on core customer impact metrics, like how do we acquire customers, how do we help deliver value to customers, how do we make sure that they continue using the product, and they upgrade or they subscribe. So these are some of the challenges that I usually sort of work with.
Thanks so much for that intro. And yeah, it really sounds like your role, dealing with internal and external pressures sounds like very cross-functional. You also have, pressure from leadership, I'm sure, but it also really sounds like your role is very impactful since you're dealing with customer metrics and business metrics at the same time. That's a I feel like you sit in like a very, very powerful position. So super excited to get into our conversation today. We'll be talking about why product discovery so often fails, even when teams are doing interviews, they're collecting data, and what it actually takes to operationalize that so that insights get used and not lost across teams. So as we go through our conversation today, everyone listening in, please feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we will save some time at the end for a live Q&A with Prama. Super excited to dig in. So, my first question for you is you've shared that teams often do interviews but still fail at discovery. So, I'm curious, can you explain from an operations standpoint, what is the root cause of that mismatch?
Yeah, so I think there are two things that are happening in my view. One is really dependent on maturity. So, for instance, if the organizations are low maturity, what discovery essentially boils down to is just talking to customers. Talking to customers is actually not doing research. And interviews are not necessarily the only methodology available. And assuming that interview is the methodology of the choice, doing interviews is just 20% of the job. The rest of it is still, you have to still come up with a plan, you have to identify the right questions, you have to be able to analyze, you'll have to be able to connect the analysis that you have to the questions that you've started with. All of this work needs to happen. That typically does not happen in low maturity organizations. In high maturity organizations, I've seen that researchers sort of take that burden on, so they are today supporting their product teams or their design teams to do this discovery work, but this is on top of all the research that they have to do. So I think bandwidth, lack of process in place, these are two challenges that sort of prevent discovery from happening in the larger organizations.
Interesting. Yeah, I really like that you called out that discovery is interconnected to maturity. And I think there's also, you mentioned that interviews are only 20% of the work that's actually happening. So I think it's interesting to kind of, yeah, tie that back to the maturity of the company overall. And it's like the planning, analysis, all of those different pieces of research. I feel like in a lot of companies, you see an interview and you're like, wow, that was really great. But that's only sort of like the tip of the iceberg, is that there's so many other, operations that happen behind the scenes. So I know you mentioned two challenges that sort of like prevent that research from happening at the right time. I'm curious, with your experience in growth roles at these organizations, what are some of the other operational blockers that prevent that from happening?
I think growth is a very specific scenario also, because in growth, the speed becomes everything. Often the teams are moving at much faster pace than other organizations, because if you don't hit the customer impact numbers or the business impact numbers, and I'll use them interchangeably because it essentially, we are still talking about acquisition, adoption, monetization. If you don't hit those numbers, then it affects the business health, and research constantly has to work with the product marketing and sales team, depending on the type of the organization, whether B2B or B2C, to help deliver those impact numbers. So in growth, you have to make sure that you're fast, you have to make sure you're rigorous, because honestly, if your research insights are not reliable, you will start seeing the results fairly quickly. You can see that research impact is not there, and the teams will stop trusting the research work. So the lag is not as much in growth as compared to other organizations.
Yeah, that's super interesting. When you're mentioning that not hitting those numbers affects the overall business health, I would imagine that is like a lot of pressure on you and on your team. And so I'm curious, this is kind of like a side question out of curiosity. How do you deal with that pressure?
I mean, honestly, that's what I started. It was coincidence that I sort of ended in growth. So for me, research was this. For me, from the beginning, these are the challenges that I was dealing with. This pressure was always on. The minute I entered a tech industry, I think about 7, 8 years ago, I was in the growth team of Uber. And from then on, these were the consistent challenges that I had to work with. And the way I started thinking about it is, these are operational challenges. So one of the biggest blocker for research to happen is often not methodology or research expertise. It's actually lack of proper operations being set up. So how do you solve for those operational challenges, and how do you make sure they scale? And working closely with, say, research operations teams, working closely with marketing teams, working closely with sales teams, working closely with any team that has access to customers is one of the first things that I do. And leveraging all the data that all of these other teams are collecting also is very helpful. So instead of trying to think that I'm the only person who can do research, how do I sort of work with other teams to get that data, and then I can do the analysis and I can figure out how to leverage the data to answer the questions. I think there are different ways to look at this problem, instead of trying to think that you're the only person who's collecting the data. That's one way to deal with the pressure. But I guess this pressure was always there, so it's not new, it's something that I'm used to. And maybe I never thought of it that way, that this is a pressure situation.
Yeah, I mean, just yeah, hearing sort of like from the outside, I think yeah, your sort of concept on it is really interesting. That it sounds like you sort of view your role today and your previous roles as more of an enabler, and sort of like unlocking the bottleneck of discovery and research for the wider team and the wider business, which I think is like yeah, a really interesting way to look at it. Um, awesome. So yeah, in the past you've said that. In these companies, you know, sometimes and like companies that I've seen before, research has a reputation that it's too slow. And I know like earlier on in this conversation, we were talking about how there's so many moving parts to doing good research. So what have you seen that are sort of like those hidden operational or system issues that actually make research slow?
I think I don't think research is slow. I think it's a misconception that people have. Also, it's probably the expectation that we have with research. You're not going to get insights tomorrow. Research is not going to happen in a day. No matter what methodology you pick, no matter who is doing the research, researcher or not, it is going to take a certain amount of time to actually do good research, first of all. And second, I think often the researchers, especially in low maturity organizations or B2B SaaS products or enterprise products, access to customers is so hard that these researchers don't have access to customers. Unlocking that takes a lot of time. So the way I think about my role now over the years is, first of all, I need to figure out how do I unlock access to customers. If I can unlock that, then I can move fairly quickly. But if that gets blocked, if I don't have that kind of operational support, it could be that there is a research operations teams that can help me unblock it. But in many organizations, there aren't research operations teams. So how do you sort of do this yourself? And the best way I've done it is actually build relationship with sales, marketing, or customer support or local operations team, and that becomes part of the job, building those relationships. But in a lot of these onboarding guides that I have when I join a new team or a new company, that is actually never mentioned. It's not something someone talks about. It's never written anywhere. But that has been the single most powerful way to unblock access and then speed up research. Because once the operations is set up, then I can move fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So yeah, we sort of talked about before about you being like an enabler, but it also sounds like a big piece of your role is that communication with cross-functional teams to be able to unlock access to customers that I know for a lot of teams is very, very challenging and really sort of like the root of doing good research.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. I also added this poll into the chat. Which is what most often blocks research from happening at the right time, for folks who are listening in today. I'm curious, Prema, if these results surprise you, because it seems like stakeholder buy-in is winning.
Yes, not so much. I think stakeholder buy-in is the first one, which I expected. The second would have been recruiting participants. Um, but stakeholder buy-in is also dependent on how the organization actually views research, and I'll sort of club both of these together because even in the previous example that I gave, building relationships with other teams, communication is one aspect, but you'll have to build relationship for them to actually support you because all of these teams are also very busy. Similarly, even in the case of stakeholder buy in, I think if someone has never seen what is the outcome of research, or if someone has not been able to apply research in their past, it's very hard to visualize how research will be able to help them. I think creating that narrative, helping them see that is one of the primary jobs of a researcher. And it takes a little bit of time. I've realized that the fastest way to do this is to do a small project, deliver results, and make sure those results are actually implemented with the product team. Work in collaboration with them. I always believe in this idea that you have to demonstrate what value you bring, and it's very hard to visualize the value of research. And this is a challenge consistently I've seen across companies. In the organizations that I have worked with, there's usually a large research team already. So often the challenge is that maybe a particular stakeholder hasn't had a great experience in past with research, or the research hasn't delivered value in time, or they have not been able to implement the challenges or the recommendations that the research has made in the past. Understanding exactly what is driving that mistrust with research is the first thing I do. And then I figure out, okay, how do I sort of solve for this? So in some ways, I'm doing research with the stakeholders itself. So do first research with stakeholders, understand what's preventing them from relying on research or what's breaking their trust in research, and then figure out how to solve for that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I really like that you highlighted that it's super important to demonstrate the value that you bring, especially in, a growth role where you're responsible for customer and for business metrics. And yeah, like we touched on, I think it's sounding like communication is such a key element to that. So I'm curious, when we were talking about stakeholder buy-in and sort of communicating with those stakeholders to understand what they need, I'm curious if you have any tips for us on how do you talk to different stakeholders or like tweak the way that you communicate with them in order to be effective with this?
That's a great question. I don't think I have one answer. It really depends on the stakeholder, it depends on the organization, it depends on what their culture is like, product culture is like, and how do they rely on research. These are some of the questions that I have to answer. But a few things that always work is one, I want to understand the history of their involvement with research in the past. Have they worked with research before? What do they think about it? Especially if I'm new, they have not worked with me. So they're usually more honest in the beginning of that relationship. So get that out of the way in the beginning itself. Have that conversation. Ask them what hasn't worked, why something hasn't worked, why do they think research is not impactful according to them. Understanding some of these things is a great start point. Then you can target your communication according to that. Second, I think one of the things that has been really helpful, which I realized much later in my career, is I don't have to do a project to actually show the impact of research. Maybe they're working on a project right now and there's someone else in the organization who's actually done that research. I just need to give that research to them and say, hey, this might be helpful for you. Now this again builds trust. They understand that you're invested in their decision making. They need to understand that my goal is to not do just a research project. My goal is to actually help them with that decision making. If they understand that, if they know that I can help them with that and I'll help them unlock that, they will start trusting me. And this goes within the product team, but also with marketing, sales, and customer support. I can't just go to them and say, hey, help me with recruitment. What is the incentive that they will have? Can I help them unlock in some way? Can I help their processes in some way? I think it has to be a bit of how do I help that stakeholder do their job with my skill set, and how can I enable that faster? If that happens, then you start building a two-way relationship rather than a one-way communication.
Yeah, that's super, super interesting. I really like that you shared that you sort of start your relationship building with them by understanding their history with research. I feel like that's a really great way to like start to build those relationships. But something I definitely want to highlight is obviously you're a very empathetic person to be able to even like default to that. And I think researchers are naturally very empathetic. So definitely want to highlight that. It's absolutely a strength with research building in like, positions like yours, but also just for anyone within research who needs to collaborate with folks across the org. And it's amazing that that comes so naturally to you. um, so kind of going back to our conversation about, research being slow is a misconception. I really like that you highlighted that. I'm curious if we aren't able to understand customers quickly within discovery or research, the whole org can get blocked and decisions can be halted. I'm curious if there's anything in your experience that you've seen that is uniquely hard about discovery specifically in growth teams.
Yeah, I think investing time in discovery is really hard. I've seen that product teams and designers, forget researchers, even PMs and designers often have to convince their leadership to say, we need to do discovery. Often the belief is that you already have all the data you need to be able to do discovery. You just need to look at that data. But sometimes discovery is about going deeper in a problem. You know that there is a problem, but discovery is helps you understand that problem a bit more deeply, understand how the nuances of that problem change depending on the user segment. So there's a lot more scope there, and often I feel like uh, you just don't get the time, you don't get the buy-in to do the discovery, one. And two, recently I've started seeing this trend where because we have AI tools right now like Lovable where we can quickly prototype, we are skipping all of this process and we're directly going and saying, "Yeah, let me just prototype this idea and show it to customer and get feedback." Now what happens as a result of that is, while I think it's a very powerful tool and it is speeding up the process, you're essentially cutting all the steps before you actually come to ideation or solution. You've cut the step of problem discovery. You've cut the step of going deeper in the problem. You've cut the step of coming up with multiple ideas. You've cut the step of coming testing those multiple ideas and arriving at one solution. You've directly gone to the solution, and while it feels like it's very fast and it's very meaningful, I think it also increases overall time because you constantly are building new solutions and constantly testing it instead of identifying the problem to begin with and creating that clarity around the problem. If there is no clarity around the problem, we're just like throwing things in the air and hoping something sticks.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's kind of sounding like I know there's a saying that's like um, trying to like chop wood with a dull axe. It's like instead of stopping to sharpen the axe, which could, make your process more efficient, cause or like remove bottlenecks later on and actually save you time when you start like right from the beginning.
Yeah. I think that's a great quote because I think it sort of extends to how people think about research as well. It's synonymous to that because it feels like you're taking action the minute you take the axe and start chopping,
Right.
and sharpening is slowing you down. But taking action is not always the most efficient path. Stopping down and doing the things that you need to do before it might actually result in better efficiency.
Totally. 100%. And I think like better insights at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Interesting. Awesome. Well, okay. I know I did not see this question earlier, but I want to pull it up because it's related to our stakeholder chat that we were talking about. So Maggie says, what do you do when you have stakeholders who want to include research but are not always clear about the research they want to do?
That's a great question. I think having a conversation, like I sometimes ask, what is the outcome they're hoping to get out of research? It's very hard sometimes to understand what decisions they're going to make because this decision clarity also takes a bit of time, and also it's constantly evolving. So I tend to ask, okay, what are the decisions you're trying to make? What is the outcome? Like, let's hope we've completed the research. What kind of insights would you like to see, and how are you going to use those insights? What are you going to do with them? I think having these conversations, and there are different ways to come at it. Sorry, there are different ways to come at this conversation. It really depends on the stakeholder, but trying to have that conversation before the research kicks off is really helpful. Then they also see a value in including research because once you've had that conversation, it's in their mind that this researcher is going to do this research and that's how I'm going to use this research. So you've already built that mental model in, and then they sort of elevate your research with their stakeholders, their leadership as well. But that conversation is a critical piece. Early on in my career, I used to be like, okay, the team has told me to do this research, I'll go do that research. This is very early on in my career, and I've realized as I grew in my career that sometimes what they're telling me is not actually what they want. What they actually want needs to be peeled. It's like an onion. You have to peel it and get to the center of it. And often that conversation does take time, but it's very meaningful to have, and also results in your research being used and your research being impactful.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting. Yeah, I think another area where I guess like sort of relating back to our earlier in this conversation where you were sort of talking about building relationships with stakeholders, I think that also ties in here because once you start to build those that trust with stakeholders, maybe that relationship might change where they know sort of like your expectations and they're able to even better communicate with you as time goes on about sort of like what you need to run that research. Um,
Absolutely. I've seen that behavior change. Like after the first time I do a project with someone and that conversation has happened, the next time they come in with that conversation or they come and tell me, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. These are some of the open questions we have. Now we want to figure out with you, how do we sort of take this forward? So they sort of start seeing you as a collaborator rather than, you as this consultant sort of a function. I think that's what building trust essentially does. One is it improves your relationship, but also you become embedded in the product team, and they start seeing you as a partner rather and a collaborator rather than this external consultant who has a very specific expertise and will come in and go.
Totally. Absolutely. And I think that's also a really, really incredible place to get to in like your career, is like to be sort of like the default add to those conversations. Like, yes, I'm going to go to Prema because she is sort of like a wealth of insights and is going to help us figure this out. Instead of being, yeah, someone who's kind of like ad hoc, yeah, let me send this over and, see what comes back. So yeah, totally agree that that collaborator role is an incredible shift if you're able to do it. I think another area where stakeholders also maybe, especially, I don't know. Well, yeah, I was going to say maybe like stakeholders that are more in leadership, but I think just generally where there lies a bit of confusion is that discovery isn't necessarily on like net new product creation. So I'm curious if you can share, how does that discovery process shift when the problems are within like activation, retention, or adoption?
Could you repeat that question, because I think I lost the question somewhere?
Yeah, for sure. So the question is, how does discovery shift when the problems or the research that needs to be done is around activation, retention, or adoption, and not necessarily net new product creation?
Right. Okay. I think it's also how we define discovery, right? Discovery is like this vague. The naming is so vague, but discovery could also be just understanding your existing customers, because maybe your customers are actually not, you're acquiring customers, but they're actually not maybe adopting the product. Maybe it is about unlocking a new segment of customers. Maybe it is about figuring out existing pain points because customers are spending way too much time, say, in onboarding or setup. Discovery can actually happen anywhere. You're trying to understand either the problem or the customer a bit more deeply. And that's why I was going back to in the initial part of the conversation. I said, you know what, interviews might not be the best methodology every time for discovery. Maybe you have data actually to rely on. You have behavioral data which is clearly showing you that this is where your customers are getting blocked, and perhaps you don't need to do net new interviews. You need to reach out to existing customers to understand what's happening. So discovery doesn't necessarily mean that you're creating new product every time or you're creating new solution every time. Discovery is just a process at the beginning of a development cycle or a design cycle where you're trying to understand a problem or a user segment a bit more deeply, or you're coming up with a net new area that you want to solve for.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think it's um, definitely ideal to be looking at customers who are like, whether they're like new customers or old or like anywhere along sort of like their journey with the company. Um, yeah, I think that's super interesting. Thank you for sharing. We do have another question in here that I will pull up, which is, how do you balance doing rigorous research under tight timelines?
This is my favorite question. Unfortunately, I do not have a great answer for this. I think all of us are extremely constrained with timelines. Everything, like every time I talk to any team, and this is across my career, every time I've spoken to any team, they wanted research yesterday. I'm always dealing with teams that wanted research yesterday, and I have to deal with that timeline in mind. I think having a clear conversation about what you could do, what is the best thing you can do, and sometimes rigor is also to do with risk. How risky is a bet? How risky is a certain bet? If the bet is not too risky, maybe research is actually not needed. Having that clear conversation, having prioritization, and understanding what you can do in that timeline, and being able to communicate as honestly as possible with the teams is a great start point. I think even your stakeholders understand that if they're coming to you and saying, hey, I need this in 1 week, there's no way you could do like really rigorous research in 1 week. There's probably a concept test that you can do, or maybe you can run a few interviews, or maybe you could do a quick survey. And quick survey, there's nothing called a quick survey, but you need to communicate with your team and say, hey, in this timeline that you're giving me, this is what I can do, and this is not the most rigorous way of doing this. Is this a risky bet? If it's a risky bet, can I negotiate for additional time? I think having that conversation is helpful. I also have this conversation with my manager or with my like research leadership to try and understand how what is the best way I could do that particular research. So I would balance rigor, time, and risk, and figure out what is the most optimum thing to do. And also, maybe you could do it iteratively as well. One of the things that I've started doing is pick out the easiest one and start there and say, okay, this is the most riskiest piece of or riskiest decision that we need to make. That doesn't need to be made next week. That can be made a few weeks down the line. So maybe I'll focus on that while you're building this other part. So being able to almost piecemeal it is also helpful. But these are conversations that need to happen with your stakeholders, they need to happen with your leadership, and there needs to be a prioritization. And these need to be honest conversations, because at the end of the day, I think the rigor of, like, I am responsible for my research insights. So I need to be very honest about the rigor of it from the beginning. I cannot be like, oh, I can do anything, and you can rely on this data that I've collected. I need to be honest about my practice as well.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I know there's no like perfect answer. I wish that there was. But I will also go ahead and say that I think some timelines are put onto researchers that I've seen that are sort of maybe, I don't know if you would agree with this, but arbitrary. Like, we need to have this done immediately, but it's like, okay, how does that actually impact customers? And why is there such a huge rush for research to get done?
Yeah, yeah. I think these are definitely difficult conversation to have, and you're right. They're arbitrary. Also, maybe the stakeholders don't understand what it would take to do rigorous research. So, for instance, I've had conversations with my team. Sometimes they've said, "Oh, you know what? We want this research done in like 1.5 week or 2 weeks," and I'm like, "You know what? To do this properly, this is a risky bet. How risky is this bet?" That is the question I ask. And then if I can get that clarity that this is a risky bet, then I'm like, this cannot happen in 2 weeks. So what do we do? What is an alternative? Can you give me extended timeline on this? Can we piecemeal it? Can we break it down? Like, I think being able to have these difficult conversations is also part of the job. And I have realized this only with experience, because I think in the beginning of the career, it's always like doing the research project is a very basic expectation that you're able to deliver a research project. But being able to build those relationships, being able to drive impact, and being able to have these difficult conversations where you can work with your team and say, hey, you know what, at this point of time, this is a really risky bet. This timeline can be moved, and we can do piecemeal of it in the next 1 week. But the more risky part is going to take some time because it is a complex research. I think having that communication is important, and expecting your stakeholders to know all of that is not fair. You need to have that relationship, and they're relying on you to tell them that.
Yeah, I really like that you sort of pose the question to stakeholders, how risky is this bet? I think that helps them understand that, like, maybe that's something they haven't even thought about. Like, that helps them understand, oh, this is a risky bet. Maybe we shouldn't, maybe we shouldn't be asking for this type timeline. Maybe we should spend a little bit more time on validating it. I'm curious, I know that you mentioned some of the strategies to maybe get a deadline extended or to help understand why you might need more time is to break it down or piecemeal it and maybe help stakeholders get educated on why it might take a longer time. I'm curious if you have any tips to help stakeholders understand why more time might be necessary.
I feel like a broken record, but I would say it also comes down to relationship. Because if I haven't built a relationship and I go say, hey, I'm gonna need more time because of XYZ reason, it sort of breaks trust. So if I already have that relationship with my team, then I can, have that conversation. So building relationships is very critical for success of any researcher in a organization, I think. Two, I think having talk to your leadership. Like I constantly rely on my managers, my research directors, my senior researchers, building allies, right? Allies are always helpful in putting your case forward, right? So I also sort of talk to them and figure out if I'm thinking about this correctly, if they can help me, talk to my stakeholders as well. But I think my preference would be that still the first build relationship with the stakeholders. If that does not solve the problem, like for instance in this off case that your stakeholders do not understand why you need to spend so much time, I think then relying on your allies is a great second step. I think allies are very powerful in a product organization, especially as a researcher. I will tell you that allies are very, very valuable. So rely on your allies to put your case forward. Allies tend to understand your perspective almost always, because they are not as invested and their incentives are very different than your own product team. So rely on your allies to sort of build that, bridge that gap. But I think between these two things, you should be able to convince your stakeholders. And also, in some cases, honestly, maybe they have to release a product feature. They have to ship it in 2 weeks. They don't have a choice. They are incentivized quite differently, and they are also under strict timelines. Then figuring out what is the midway. Maybe there is a midway. Like trying to figure out what that midway is a great opportunity again to build that relationship. And there is no, I don't think there is one single answer to this particular problem. I think it depends on a lot of these variables, and trying to find your way across them also will help you become a better researcher, in my view. And it is a difficult one. I wouldn't lie about that.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, thank you for that advice. I think that makes total sense. I think, yeah, at the end of the day, it does come down to that relationship building, because it's like um, your stakeholders will trust you to do the best job that you can. And, you can, once you have that relationship, it's like you can be honest, okay, I need, another week or however long to do this to sort of like the level that we need it at based on how risky the bet is. And I think that it's kind of like a two-way street. Like you can trust them to be honest and say, you know what, we have to ship this feature by X date, and so I need your support in like helping to make that happen. So I think it's definitely a two-way street, which yeah, is I think that can be challenging as well. But yeah, I'll part of the role.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, I've even negotiated. In some situations, I've negotiated, like, you know what, I can give you secondary research at this point of time. That's the best I can do with this timeline. And then maybe we should run an experiment, or maybe do an alpha and beta before the product is released. So, even trying to say how that product is shipped is a great opportunity for you to build influence, even if you're not doing research. Actually, research is not needed there. But you can say that this seems like a risky bet, I know you need to shift. So is there a way we could run an experiment? Is there a way we could do an alpha or a beta? Can we use existing secondary research to sort of inform these decisions, or some other researcher has done research on this topic, can we use that research? So I think there are many ways to come at this situation. It's just about coming together as a team and figuring out what is the best way forward, and you're part of the team. You can't be this one person who's outside that team.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And I think, yeah, like what we were chatting about earlier is once you get to the point of being that collaborator, it's like stakeholders will eventually be coming to you for your like unique value that you can bring. I think another, yeah, interesting topic as it relates to stakeholders, and I know that you've mentioned you don't want to get into the like um, PM versus UXR ownership debate. So we don't have to go there, but I do want to ask, what do you think is the unique value that a researcher does bring?
Um, what? Recently, there was a survey. I think User Insights did this survey where they said, basically they asked, how are the researchers spending time today? How does their day-to-day job look like, and what is the distribution of the kind of work they do? researchers still spend quite a significant amount of time helping their product teams or designers to do research. So just because there is no researcher attached to a product team doesn't mean that the product or designers are not relying on researchers to support them. Two, I think methodology. You can, often I've seen there are two methodologies most people, or three methodologies most people sort of move to, and the outside research, product or product designers. I've seen them do surveys, and these are really weirdly designed surveys. And I'm not sure what is the value of those surveys sometimes. Two, I've seen interviews. Again, interviews for what purpose is not super clear. And then concept testing. And I think the other part to this is one of the core reasons why researchers are trained in their skill sets and do really a good job of doing any research is they understand biases. They are constantly sort of working to eliminate biases. I'm not saying that researchers don't bring biases, but they understand that they bring biases. Now you pivot this to product and design, right? Product managers are building the product. It is their decisions that they are testing. Designers have literally created that design. It is their baby that they're testing. You know how hard it is to get feedback on something that you've worked on. And it's not even like, it's not a critical feedback, it's not like a performance feedback. You really objectively have to assess if something is good or bad, and that requires skill, that requires training. Even in the case of interviews, I remember there was a this was early in my career. I've observed like really senior researchers well into their career, like 10, 15 years into their career, when they run interviews from time to time, ask other researchers to observe them and give them feedback. Because interviews, you need to constantly upskill yourself to be a good interviewer. I have like principal researchers on my team who still are reading and preparing to become better interviewers. It's a skill that you will never sort of pick up completely. You're thrown into these weird situations and you have to be good at your job to be able to do that. And it's a skill that you have to constantly practice. Now, this is a lot of work for a function that doesn't do primarily research. As a PM or a designer, you have 15 other things that you have to do. On top of that, you're adding a skill that requires so much practice and that requires so much rigor. It's just hard. I think it's not about can they do or can they not do. It's just that this is one more thing on 10 things they're already doing. Do they have the time to do it?
Yeah, 100%. I like that. Instead of it being like, can they or can they not, it's more so like, should they, when they have other things to focus on. And also, ideally they have a research team that they can also come to and like continue to build relationships with for that support. I also think, when you were sort of touching on, I definitely believe that because researchers are so naturally empathetic, they can really understand what customers are saying and synthesize that. But like you mentioned, are aware of their own bias within those conversations and can really sort of like validate how customers are feeling and what they're thinking, but to be able to sort of translate that into something that's actionable and usable for product teams or for the company. I think research in some ways is like a third party that's really skilled at being able to do that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think it's just not awareness. There are practices in place to make sure that bias doesn't creep in. It's just not enough that I'm aware that I could be biased. I have to do something about it, right? Like for instance, I have to make sure that if I'm doing concept testing with two different ideas, I need to make sure that they're randomized. I need to make sure that my sample is randomized. There is a sampling plan. There is a process in place to make sure that my biases don't creep in. That's why I was saying that doing interviews is just 20% of the job. There is so much before and after that needs to be done to make sure your insights are reliable and the research is rigorous. So I feel like now what's happening is we're passing on that 20% of job to PMs and designers. And fair, in some cases I do think designers should test their designs, because it's great way to sort of understand how to explore an idea, how to take their idea forward. I'm not saying they shouldn't be doing it, but I do think that if you want to rely on rigorous insights, you need process in place. And the question is, who has the time to do the process and who has the training to do it.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And who is, I'll also add, like excited about it and wants to do it and has like chosen this as a career. Because I think that's a part of it as well. All right, we have a poll going on right now, but I want to pose this question to you first, Prema, and then we can share the results and see what you think. What worries you most about staying impactful as a researcher?
What worries me most about staying impactful as a researcher? That's a good question. I don't know. Um, what worries me most? That's a I think it's a worry that happens from project to project, right? Like, for instance, I don't know if I'm generally worried as a research as a profession and then thinking of its impact because product industry is evolving so quickly these days. I don't know where we'll be, where all of us will be in a few years. But I think on a day-to-day basis, um, one of the biggest fears I usually have is the product team has pivoted, that there is no problem clarity, or the problem itself has changed even before I've actually done the research. That's my biggest fear. But one way I solve for it is make sure I'm constantly talking to the team as I'm doing the research. So I'm not doing it in isolation and I'm having conversations. So I know where the product team is going. But that's usually one of the biggest fear I have, that by the time I'm actually doing the research, the product has already pivoted.
Yeah, yeah, and that's super interesting. I think, Kay, I'll go ahead and pull these responses up onto the screen because I think they're super interesting. But I think that kind of ties into the number one winner here, like being bypassed of what happens when you start a research project, but by the time you connect with the product team again, they're already on to the next project. So I'm curious if these results are surprising to you, or maybe if you have any stories or lessons learned that you can share for like overcoming these worries.
No, I completely like I relate with all of these worries. I think being bypassed is one of the biggest fears. I understand that fear, but I think maybe sometime last year I realized that there are so many projects because there's one researcher supporting 10 teams usually, or one research supporting entire product organization. I feel like it's okay if they bypass me this time. I can show my value next time. I can figure out another project where I can deliver value. But I think I can relate to that fear. Um, but I would also say that, again, sounding like a broken record, but building relationships can prevent this from happening. Building relationships also means you can go back to the stakeholders and understand why did they bypass you. Sometimes they might not have a choice. Sometimes they just, they have to ship in a few days. They just don't have a choice. And in that case, maybe bypassing you was not an intentional decision. It just so happened, and you can have that conversation with them. So it's that, but I get it. It is a fear. I definitely do have that fear too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even like having those conversations takes a lot of courage too. I think it's so easy to just be like, okay, moving on to the next thing. But I think, yeah, like what you're sharing is being able to set those expectations across the team and help understand, maybe why did they bypass you and what could be done differently in the future. I think that also provides an opportunity for, yeah, like you as a researcher to communicate your value again. And it's like, maybe here's why maybe that shouldn't happen in the future. What can we do differently?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I also wanted to pull up this comment in the chat. I'm curious if you have any comments on it. Lisa says, I wonder why AI tools were not included in that poll. I worry for a future where stakeholders forget human in the loop is a requisite for good AI hygiene. Curious what you think about this one.
Absolutely. I agree with your viewpoint. Humans are definitely needed. I think AI tools can make us faster, but I go back to the same thing. You still need skill, you still need an understanding of how research is done. You just can't expect AI to do everything for you without interjection, without ensuring there is quality. So, while I think it's changing how we do research, what tools we use today, what are the practices we follow in some ways. But I think research as a practice, the processes we follow, all of that is still the same. How we're doing it is different, but what we're doing is still the same. So I do think humans are needed, and I don't know if we'll go into a world where AI will do the interviews. Like one of the things I was thinking about, I know there are AI moderation tools that are becoming very popular and are showing like great results. But I keep thinking about how AI tools would do in India. Like if a AI moderator is talking to a Uber driver in India, I wonder how that conversation will go. I have no idea. I can't even imagine that conversation, to be very honest. And inherently, research is such a human understanding pursuit, right? If you're also sort of passing that on to AI, I don't know if that's the right way to think about it. Not sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's super interesting, definitely like changing the way that we work. But I also think something we also chatted about earlier is like that the empathy that researchers naturally have, and I think also curiosity. I don't think like AI is simply not there yet. There's
Yeah.
no way at the moment that AI can like relate to users and to customer feedback and to be empathetic and understanding and validating. And so I think like we will always need a human in the loop at some point. And I think some of these AI moderation tools, yeah, it's very interesting to see how they work. But at the moment, um, I'm kind of viewing them as like supplementary and not a replacement to research that's already existing within organizations today.
Yeah, definitely. I can see them becoming really powerful tools. Like, for instance, I've read something about adaptive surveys. And I'm very curious how they go, how adaptive surveys sort of influence how we run surveys in the future, the kind of responses people give to an adaptive survey. Maybe you can have hyper personalized surveys. So I don't know. That seems like an exciting idea to me. There are some difficult conversations that people have, and maybe it's easier to talk to an AI than to a human. You do see a lot of people interacting with ChatGPT about their really personal goals, personal milestones. Maybe it's easier to have certain kinds of conversations with AI. But I don't know. I don't yet know how it will shape research. And I do think that you still need human in the loop, no matter how advanced tools get. You still need a human to be able to collect that data, analyze that data, or if AI is doing still the analysis, still interject and figure out what kind of data is relevant to you. So, yeah, but I don't know where this is going, to be very honest.
Yeah, we'll have to have another conversation in like a year or a few years and yeah, and close the loop because I totally agree. I think things are changing every single day. It's and yeah, sort of like back to the conversation we were having about fear. It's totally valid that this is something that's concerning. It's like the unknown. All right.
I mean, another way to look at it, or what I think I'm very optimistic about, is technology has changed drastically in the last 100 years. We've gone from radios to televisions to computers to now AI. So I think humans do evolve with technology. So we will evolve with that technology. So I'm optimistic about that. Maybe the way we work will look different, but we'll all still do something. We still have to make decisions. At the end of the day, humans have to make decisions. AI is not making decisions for you. So I think that I see as optimistic. And the second thing that, as of today, one of the biggest challenges I see with most AI tools is they're making missing the whole context layer and the nuance that all these conversations have. So often I have to work with the AI tools to provide all of those nuance and context. And sometimes it's just faster to do it on my own without relying on AI at all.
True. Yeah, 100%. Especially because it's like you have, yeah, like you said, all the context, all the nuance, instead of just like training another ChatGPT project to help you out. It's like, hey, let me just do this myself. It makes sense. Um, we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, so I want to encourage everyone to continue to drop your questions in the chat. But while we are on the topic of AI, let me pull up this question from Gabriel, who says, "Are there AI tools that you use to help you in doing research or synthesizing your findings?"
That's a good question. So I do use AI tools for my writing. Like for instance, I need to draft something, like a plan or a guide. AI tools are helpful to start, but I often end up rewriting most of it as well. It gives me a structure to start with rather than a blank page. I haven't figured out. I don't know if it's the most efficient way to do it, but at least it solves the blank page problem a little bit for me. Um, with synthesizing, I know that a lot of people around now are using AI tools for synthesizing qualitative data specifically. I have not had that much success with it. I have multiple reasons for that. One, if the interviews are even slightly complex, then the whole nuance gets missed out in with the AI tools. And there's almost like I can use them for maybe sharing preliminary insights with my team because it helps them stay in loop with the project. But like to do proper analysis, I still rely on doing analysis manually. To I do think familiarity with data makes me a better researcher. The minute I put all of that to AI, I lose familiarity with the data that I've collected. I remember the time in Uber, at least when I was in Uber, I used to sit and transcribe all my interviews. And my transcription time was at least double or triple of my interview time, which meant that I was very, very familiar with everything that the customer has said. And that sort of influenced how I did analysis. I know exactly where that data point was coming from. And now I feel like I'm losing all of that to AI. So with synthesis, I'm not so sure. I'm not yet sure or confident to rely on AI. And at the very least, in cases where I'm in very like tight timelines and I have to use AI to quickly do synthesis, I still come up with a coding system that this is the coding system that you need to use. This is the data that you need to use. So I clean up the data, I come up with a coding system, and then I feed to AI. And even then, I go back and do some amount of analysis manually still. So I would say partly I'm using them, I'm constantly testing them, but I don't have like confidence to rely on them completely. And I do end up doing a lot of work again or rework it still.
Yep. Yeah, fair enough. I think I really liked what you mentioned of sort of using AI tools as a brainstorming partner and avoiding that like, yeah, blank page problem and just like getting something on the page and maybe inspiring some ideas. I think
Yeah.
that's a really great way to sort of balance AI usage for efficiency, but then also ensuring that you still know what's going on. You know, you're still like in control of the work that you're doing. Amazing. Awesome. All right. Well, I know we only have 2 minutes left. This hour flew by. So I have one final question for you, Prama, which is what is one mindset shift that you think every researcher should make to stay relevant and impactful in the next few years?
What mindset shift? I think we should consider ourselves part of the team, that we when product managers and designers and marketers and everyone else in a product organization is extending their roles and doing all of these things that are not part of their job. I think researchers should also start thinking about their role like that. It will help us stay relevant, it will extend our influence, and we'll find these opportunities that no one else has found, that we can actually deliver impact in. And that doesn't mean just doing a research project. That means collaborating with teams, finding opportunities that you might not even think of. Like an example I'll give you is I figured out that I was a designer previously before I pivoted to research. I used to work as a design studios as a service designer, and I realized that one of the biggest way to drive impact is to visualize my insights into the context of customer journey. That was fantastic opportunity. I wouldn't even think about it if I hadn't extended myself to a role that I don't normally play. So thinking about what are those extensions of research role and shifting mindset of from a researcher to how can I be a valuable and relevant product team member, I think that would really be helpful. At least that's how I'm thinking about myself.
Totally. No, I love that. I think that's valuable advice, just valuable career advice overall. And I think, yeah, it really goes hand in hand with seems to be like our theme of the conversation today of building relationships cross functionally and sort of how to do that. Because yeah, I think it means that what you can do with your career once you've established those relationships and you have allies within, different areas of the business, if you ever wanted to either like specialize, maybe go more general, maybe even switch roles entirely at some point, move like more into product or somewhere else, you have that experience and maybe even the connections to do so. So I think that's, yeah, really, really valuable advice in general.
Yeah, I think so too.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you everybody for listening in today. That was a really fun conversation. Definitely recommend giving Prema a follow on LinkedIn. She also has some really, really interesting articles that she shares on there. So definitely recommend checking those out. But otherwise, hope everybody enjoyed the conversation today and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you so much, Prema. It was great to chat with you.
It was lovely talking to you and lovely questions. Really made me think, and I have so many questions that I'll take away today and think about them more. Thank you so much for joining and posing such wonderful questions.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.